Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at the Roadmaster Diode Wiring Kit for a 2021 Subaru Crosstrek. Now there are 5 required components when flat towing a vehicle. And the first one, starting on the vehicle side, is going to be the base plate. And the base plate attaches to the frame of the vehicle, and that's going to allow for all your connection points for your other components. Now, going along with that, you see our tow bar here is actually attached to that base plate, and that's going to make that connection between the vehicle and the RV. Next, you have your safety chains, and that's going to attach to the loops on your base plate and also to the side of the camper. That way, if they do become disconnected for whatever reason, these chains are going to hold this in place. Next, you have your braking system. Your braking system will allow the vehicle to slow and stop as you put those brakes on the RV. Also included with that is going to be this breakaway switch. So if all your components fail, this is going to pull this cable, putting the brakes on the vehicle and bringing it to a stop so it's not rolling down the highway. Next, you have your diode wiring, and your diode wiring is going to send the turn signals and brake lights and running lights from your RV to your vehicle. And this is all done based on this umbilical cord, which is going to attach your 6-pole here that we have on our vehicle to the 7-pole on the camper. So diode wiring is a really nice technology for a vehicle that's flat towed. Many times you'll see you have magnetic lights or even some wireless lights that transmit the signal from your motorhome. Well, this is nice because it keeps it all integrated into your vehicle. It's less to carry around. And that's accomplished by sending the signal from your coach through the 6-pole to the actual taillights in the vehicle, where we have diodes in place. And it ties into the factory wiring, and it also prevents any backfeed from occurring. So it's going to keep your lights safe, but also you're going to have those signals ready to work whenever you plug into your camper. Now, included with our diode wiring is going to be our umbilical here. So that's going to allow our 7-pole here to attach to our 6-pole on the vehicle, and that's going to send that signal from the vehicle to the car to the taillights, and that's going to let people behind you know when you're braking or making turns. And also just having running lights on. Many times people think a car's trailing behind an RV with their lights off, and this actually lets them know that it is actually on and going to keep you safe and legal during night driving as well as daytime driving. Depending on your flat tow needs, it can come in a few different configurations, and that's going to be changing this plug. Everything on the vehicle side will stay the same, but you can get this coiled plug like you see here. You can also get a straight plug. You can get it without a plug, or you can also get it for a 4-pole rather than a 6-pole. Now, as far as the installation goes, there's going to be a little bit of wire running, but it's not too terribly hard. And when you get to the taillights, you'll be popping those out, cutting some cables and making a few splices, but I'll be here to walk you through that. So let's take a look at that installation. We're going to begin our install by running our wire. And so since this is going to feed to the front here, I just went ahead and I gave myself a little bit of extra room, and I taped this down to where our 6-pole is going to go. And that way we'll have this here for later. And then I just simply followed our base plate here and kind of routed it up. While we have our front fascia off, this makes it a lot easier to route this up. Then I kind of routed it here. You can see the zip tie. I actually have my wires tucked in to the radiator support, and then just kind of went back this way. Now you're going to see at this point I split off my white wire, and the reason being is this is going to be our ground, and it can really be grounded anywhere throughout the vehicle, but we have a factory ground here, so it's going to be nice to have one point where all of our grounds go, and that way if we have any grounding issues, we can go back to this one contact, and we know that this is going to be good because it's a factory one. So what you're going to want to do is, with the 4 wires, you just kind of split with a wire snip just to get that white one separate, and then you're going to want to peel that back. Now what I did is I cut off the excess so I don't have to run that white wire back, and you're left with a decent amount. In fact, this is how much extra I had, and this is going to come in handy when we actually go back to our tail lights, because we are going to have to jump them from one to the other, and sometimes finding extra wire can be tricky. So getting our ground up this early means that we have that extra wire for the back. So let's go ahead, we'll get a ring terminal on here and get it on our ground. So we'll go ahead and strip off the end of our white wire, and then included in the kit is going to be a ring terminal, so we're actually going to use that. And we'll just crimp this down. I double mine up just a little bit. Now we'll go ahead and get this ground screw loosened up. Looks like it's going to be a 10 millimeter. Now it's kind of tight here, so to get that off and make sure that we have a handle on that screw so it doesn't fall down, I'm just going to take off my fuse panel cover, and that makes it quite a bit easier to get our ratcheting wrench on there. Now with our ground screw taken out here, we can go ahead and place it here on our ring terminal. And I'm seeing that it is pretty close to the same size, not to worry. I'm gonna go ahead and just make a tiny little clip here, and that way it opens it up and allows this to sit on there. You can also run a drill bit through here just to enlarge it just a little, but I'm gonna just make a quick little cut here, and that's gonna allow us to kind of open that up a hair and get that stud on there, or the bolt on there I should say. Kind of squeeze that through, and it's still going to hold on there quite well, as you can see. And then make sure if this came loose, you have that slot there that kind of slides back in, and we can now go ahead and get this tightened in place. So with this ground screw tightened down, we can continue our routing, and I simply just kind of follow it along here. You're going to want to make sure you have just a little bit of extra slack just to make it a little bit easier to run. But kind of tucking back here underneath the Breakmaster cylinder, I started to route down. Now the steering rack, you can see right here, is protruding, and you don't want that to make any contact. So I've kind of routed it a little bit lower, and I'm going to go back with a few zip ties and kind of just find some points down here just to make sure that it's not making contact with that. Now this car in general, being all-wheel drive and having exhaust that kind of routes underneath the way that it does make it a little bit tricky to run this, because during all of your wiring you're going to want to make sure you're staying away from any moving parts that can pinch, as well as exhaust, and that way it's not going to melt. So let's get under the car and I'll show you how I routed it to the back of the vehicle. So you can see our steering column there and our wire. So I'm going to go back with a few zip ties and just kind of using some of the plumbing lines around there, just kind of get this to where it's going around that steering. We're not going to want that to make any contact. And kind of looking at where I've routed it, if you can route it a little bit tighter here, that's going to work pretty well. And then I just simply kind of went through here. We have our underbody kind of covering. There's a plastic tab here. I just popped that out, ran our wire through, and put that back in place just to kind of hold it tight against the chassis. Routing it back, I went over this little cross member here, and as you can see, like, your exhaust again is pretty close to this, so you want to try to avoid that as much as possible, as much as you can. But here we're actually using this underbody panel to kind of protect it, and then from here we are going to route it into the center part of our frame rail here to keep it all protected. Now you're going to see that yours has probably a plastic cover, so you're going to want to remove that. And there's just a few 10 millimeter bolts, as well as some plastic push pins. And you're also going to want to remove the rear one, which has a few 12 millimeters, as well as some plastic push pins. So go ahead, you get those out, and you're going to see this is going to be nice and open. Now you can route this along here using zip ties, but you do run the risk of, if you make contact with anything on the road, that if it pinches that wire, it can damage it, and then you're going to have to trace your wire. So routing it internally here, I know it's going to be protected. Now it is kind of tricky to route that, and I'll show you a little trick of how we got this routed down. We used a spare airline tube. It's basically just a pull wire, so if you have a hanger or anything to route electrical wire through walls or whatever it may be, basically I just pulled this grommet out and I fished this down to our end, taped this up, and I was able to easily pull that through here. Made my way back to this grommet, and I've just made a slight little cut here. I'm going to go back with some black silicone just to make sure that's sealed up, but that way I can actually put this back in place. And then I continued to route it, put a little zip tie here on our brake cable, and then going up near the gas tank, I went up and over. And you can see, again, there's a lot of moving parts here. You have your axles, you have suspension arms, so making sure that you are staying away from there and finding little points to zip tie it up to make sure it's secure is going to be ideal. So routing it back here, going to come back to where they have their trailer hitch, also the exhaust isolator bracket. I use that, and then we're going to be able to route this over to the corner where our taillight pocket is going to be. So from here, we're going to be making a few attachments, but we're also going to be reusing that fish wire technique to get these wires ran. So let's get that started. Now we are going to have to remove both the taillights to gain access to the plug, and that's where we're going to be tying our diodes into place. So in order to get your taillights off, you see these little plastic caps here. There's a little notch there. You can go ahead using a flathead or a trim panel removal tool like this. You can go ahead and remove those. And just kind of pry up, and they should kind of pop out like that. And then you're going to see there's going to be two 10mm bolts there, so we'll go ahead and get those off. And then as far as taillights, sometimes they can get a little bit tricky and fight you. I kind of just give them a wobble back and forth, as there's pins that actually kind of go into slots, and sometimes just pressure alone can kind of keep those kind of tight. So giving it kind of a forward push or a pull here and then wobbling it back and forth tends to loosen it up like that. So this is where you can see those kind of push into these slots, and then these slide onto there, and that's kind of what's fighting you sometimes. So this gains us access here to our taillight wiring, and this is where we're going to be tying in to put our diodes. So let's just go ahead, and we're going to get this unplugged. And push our tab down here, and then this should work itself out here. There we go. And now I'm going to set this aside to where it's safe, and we're going to go ahead and test this. And what we're going to be using is just a probe here. So we're going to find a nice grounding point. Here I'm just using our latch that we have for our hatch. And I'm going to just run through the light sequence to figure out our running lights, our brake lights, and our turn signals just by testing each of these and seeing how they react. And then I'll make some notes to let you guys know which ones are which, and that way we can know what color wires we're using. Gone ahead and removed our driver's side taillight as well, and I went through and tested it with our light probe, and this is kind of what we came up with. So on our driver's side, our running light is going to be, it's a light blue color. Our left turn signal is going to be the white wire. Our brake light is going to be a brown wire. Now on the passenger side, you have that same light blue color. The right turn though is going to be green, and then our brake light will be brown, just like our driver's side. So on our driver's side, we're going to go ahead and use that fish wire technique that we kind of used on the frame, and we're just going to take my airline tube here and just pass this down, and we should find it kind of tucked under here. So we'll get a hold of that. So now we're just going to make this connection with our wire on our pole line just by taping this up, and just kind of make sure that it doesn't get caught as we're pulling it up. I wrap this front, or leading edge I guess you'd say. Once we have that, we can go ahead and feed this up. Now once you have this pulled up, double check under here to make sure that you're pretty happy with the way that it's routed. And as you can see, we still have a little bit of slack, but if we make sure that it's nice and taut where we want it down there, we'll be good up here to be able to cut off some of the excess. Now from the factory, Subaru has wrapped this up with a blue tape and then a black electrical tape, as well as some heat shrink here. So we are going to have to peel this back to gain access to our wires so we can splice into them. So I used just a razor blade to kind of peel back some of it. Just be careful that you're not cutting any of the wires, and get this pulled back enough, probably to about this area here. And I'm going to trim this tubing that goes around it as well, just so we have the exposed wires. It's going to make it a lot easier for us to tie into it. So just a small little, oh, actually it's split for us, so that's pretty cool. And this excess here, we'll go ahead and cut this off, get it out of the way. So with our sheathing kind of peeled back, we have our wires exposed. We have quite a bit of excess of our 3 wires that we pulled up. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to clip right about here. That's going to give me plenty of room, but also make it a lot easier to work with here. So we'll go ahead and clip this. And then we can also go ahead and separate these wires and get them stripped. So on our diodes, we're going to see we have these little spade connectors, and this is how we're going to kind of make that jump in between these wires to the wires that we ran. Now at this point, we're going to find our white wire that we stripped up by the ground, and we're going to be using this to tie into the brown wire. And you're going to see on the diodes, there's going to be one that has a yellow spade connector, and that's just going to be larger gauge to have both of these wires attached. So let's go ahead, we'll just get our white one attached now to our brown. And we're going to be jumping these, and that way they share the same signal from each light. This kind of connects the two. So let's go ahead and get these twisted up. Okay. And with all of your connections, I suggest kind of going back, give it a slight tug just to make sure the wires aren't going to pop out. Because you really don't want to have to go back and trace a loose wire. So knowing that they're good, each connection you make is going to make it a lot easier overall. Now the rest of this white wire, we can actually just route through this pocket, and we'll be pulling this over to our other side. But for now, let's just get this down and out of the way. Now this green wire is also going to need to route over to the passenger side. So normally you can use this extra and peel the green back and get it over there, but I really don't think this would have been long enough, so I'm going to extend this wire with extra white wire. Now using 2 white wires to extend it can get a little bit confusing, especially once we route it over there. So in order to make sure that we have the proper ones, just go ahead, you're going to want to make sure that you have enough to route over to that other side, and I'm going to make a little cut, and then I'm going to tag this. And that way I know which one's attached to the brown and which one's attached to the green. So let's go ahead, we'll route this over, kind of make sure we have a little bit of excess. We still have plenty here, so we'll go ahead and I'm going to make this cut here. And then I'm going to put a little electrical tape on here just so I know that this is going to be our brown one. So now with our green wire pulled down, we're going to route this together again with this other white wire. Now that one is marked, so make sure you do that, and that's going to save you a little bit of time. And what we're going to be doing is connecting this with a heat shrink butt connector. Now this is not included in the kit, but I highly recommend these. Any connections that you make that live kind of outside the vehicle or can be exposed to water, this is going to kind of just cinch up with some heat, and that way it's all protected. You're not going to have that corrosion of the wires or any moisture causing damage. Now if you need some heat shrink butt connectors, we actually have these here at eTrailer, and they're nice for any wiring project that you might be doing for any auxiliary stuff on your vehicle. So once you have those crimped down, you just go ahead, get some heat on it, and these will cinch up. So now we have our joined together white and brown, and this is going to jump over. We're going to be tying into our running light here, which is going to be our blue. And you're going to see this is where we got our spade connector here, and really this is kind of just going to go in between here. So that way your factory wire is going in, as you see, and then out towards where that plug is. So this lives in between, kind of makes that jumper, and then this is tying off of it. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to cut this small wire here. And if you get too close to the plug, it can get kind of tricky just trying to get everything in place. These wires are small and kind of sometimes tricky to work with, so I'd go a little bit further back. And we're going to go ahead and we'll splice these ends here. And then using our spade connectors that we have on our diodes, we'll go ahead and get that connected. Again, just like before, double check your connections, make sure they're tight. So now you're going to want to take that same diode and you're going to see in and out. So your out is going to go towards the tail light. So the closest one to the plug will go on our out. And then our in, we're going to go ahead and attach the other part of that blue wire as well as our jumper wire here that we have. And that's going to be our first diode connected. So now we need to go to our brake lights. And that's going to be our brown, and we're going to go ahead and get our diode and do the same thing. So now you can see we have this all hooked up. We're going to repeat the same process on the other side using those wires that we ran across. So the yellow here is going to be the left turn signal. That green that we extended with the white, that's going to be your right turn signal. So keep that in mind when tying it all together. And then once you have that all tied together, you can see there's double-sided tape on these. You can stick them together, you can zip tie them, but either way, with these connections, I actually like to go back with a little black silicone and just fill all those up, and that way those stay protected from any moisture buildup, and that way they don't get corroded where those plugs are. So I've gone ahead and I routed my extended wires over, and I just kind of followed the inside of the bumper. There's some plastic supports that I just kind of zip tied those up, and it keeps it away from the exhaust. Then routing it up, I just kind of followed the same principle, and I re-taped this marked line, and this was going to be the one that we jumped off of the brown wire that went to that doubled up spade connector, so that way you can denote the two there. And then I just simply tied into our blue wire here, and then we have our brown wire on this one. So at this point, we're going to go ahead, I'm going to stick these together. I'm going to go ahead with my black silicone, kind of fill these gaps here, and then we're ready to plug in our taillights, and I'll hook it up to a power source up front so we can test to make sure that the lights are working. So we have our diodes ran, plugged in our taillights, so really we just need to test this. And so in the kit, you're going to see you have your 6-pole here. And so we're going to go ahead and kind of get the started of wiring up so we can test this. So first we have our little boot here. We're going to slide that on, and that can kind of just live over here for now. And then we're going to go to our backside here with a small Phillips. And on each little terminal here, you're going to see a few letter designations, and that's going to kind of give us that, pretty much tell us where these need to go. And so you're going to see you have your ground, which is GD. And that's going to be our white one. Our next one here is going to be hard to see, but it is LT. That's your left turn signal. So that's going to be our yellow. Our next one's going to be our right turn signal, which is going to be our green. And then our brown wire, this is going to be our TM. So our TM here, that's actually our trailer marking lights. We'll be using that as running lights. And then you also have this is where your 12-volt charge is. And then your S, we're not going to use it for this. That's going to be a different auxiliary one. So for now, I'm going to get these lined up, and then I'll show you how it looks, and then we'll test it out. So here we have it all put into the correct spots. I've tightened these down. So now we're going to hook this up and see how it works. We're going to be testing using a test box, but you can also hook it up to your RV to get the same signal. So now let's run it through our actual sequence here. And so starting off, we have our right turn signal on. Next, we're going to go to our brake lights. Then we're going to do our left turn signal. And then finally, our running lights. Now at this point, if you have more flat toe components to add on, you can continue on with that. But if you're stopping here, you're ready to get this mounted up and get your fascia put back on. And that was a look and installation of the Roadmaster Diode Wiring lighting kit on a 2021 Subaru Crosstrek.